Mark, a very special guest indeed. It's Dan Senor. Dan, thanks for joining us. You were part of the Bush administration, an advisor on foreign relations. You're a best-selling author. You're part of the Council of Foreign Relations now. Grade President Obama on the job he's doing right now abroad.
Well, as a strategic matter, specifically in the crisis he's dealing with today, at the moment, which is Libya, I actually think he has the right policy, which is the United States had to intervene in Libya. It had to intervene in Libya for a number of reasons. One, if we would have had human catastrophe there, potentially genocidal proportions, something like we saw in the Balkans or Rwanda, you would have had refugee crises where refugees, hundreds of thousands of them, pouring across borders throughout the region. The region is already brittle, volatile, actually at worst, and to infuse an imploding Libya into the mix, it would have been disastrous and have real strategic implications for the U.S. So it's the right policy. But now, from a strategic standpoint, he's got to be educating the American public about why it's important, which he hasn't been. He's got to acknowledge that only the U.S. can play the leadership role in this operation. We can't outsource it to NATO or our European partners. That's something he's been uncomfortable with. So you're asking me to grade him. I think he's got basically the right policy. I have deep concerns with how it's being executed.
Especially perhaps because it appeared Britain and France were taking the lead militarily. Is that still the case in your view?
Well, yes. Sarkozy in particular. I mean, Sarkozy had launched an operation against an armed column headed for Benghazi within 2 hours of the UN Security Council resolution being passed, which means the French were already ready to go. The planes were leaving the south of France, ready to leave the south of France even before the UN Security Council had agreed on this resolution. The problem with all of this, of course, is that it's great that the French are involved. It's very important that the British are involved. It's very critical that the Europeans and NATO are exercised. But only the United States can conduct and manage a very complicated, coordinated, multifaceted campaign that this operation requires. Tomahawks going from the sea, air operations flying over, arming and training the rebels to fight, to go to Tripoli. All that has to be coordinated with the air operations, so our air operations are not hitting the rebels that we're relying on. It's very complicated stuff, and it's very hard to do without incurring really high risks if you don't have the capacity in your military to do it. Only the U.S., at the end of the day, has that capacity.
Now, it's easy to focus on Libya because that's where the military action is happening. What about Egypt? Do we risk letting Egypt fall by the wayside or not be as much a part of our concern as it should be?
Absolutely. Look, the key now in Egypt is the United States playing an assertive role in helping to shape Egypt's political process going forward. If we do not dedicate the civilian resources, U.S. government civilian resources, to working with the Egyptians, we could run into a situation where the Muslim Brotherhood wins the next election and runs Egypt. And if you want a window into what that looks like, look at how Hezbollah has completely paralyzed Lebanon through the ballot box. Hezbollah was elected. They got a serious representation in the parliament. They got serious representation in the cabinet, and they brought down the Lebanese government. The same thing can happen in Egypt. It would be an enormous setback for us. The risk, of course, is provoking a backlash where the Egyptians say, wait a minute, why is the U.S. meddling in our political process? Why is the U.S. trying to micromanage our political process? That's always the tension in these situations, but I think it's worth the trade-off.
Now, what are the lessons, say top 2 lessons, maybe 3 lessons that came out of and are coming out of Iraq?
Well, I think the 2 most important lessons are the following. There is no substitute for American military leadership in calming down people's fears and anxieties and apprehensions about cooperating with us. There's no substitute. The lesson.
But what about countries that see America as an aggressor rather than as a supporter?
Well, but the key in any one of these strategies is getting civilian population leaders to work with the U.S. We can never do these things on our own. We need the locals to work with us. And the only way you get the locals to work with us is to convince them that if they cooperate with us, they will not be slaughtered by militias in their societies, by the government in their societies, by insurgencies in their societies, by terrorist proxies in their societies, that we will stand by them. And the only way we can win those people over and demonstrate that we'll stand by them is to stand by them. And you can only do that with military leadership. And that's the difference between Iraq 2004, 5, and 6, where things went south, and Iraq 2007, 8, 9, and 10, where we actually, with the surge, really put troops on the ground and worked with the locals. That's one lesson. The other lesson is we were heavily involved in shaping Iraq's political process. Iraq today has a stable government. Imperfect, but stable.
Great. Dan Senor of the Council of Foreign Relations, thank you. We're live at the Strategas Global Macro Conference.